Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of the Wellbeing Wire. Today, we're going to be talking about sleep. Now, sleep's one of those things that obviously seems to affect so many aspects of our lives. And I don't know if you remember back, well, I think it was in a certain point in the 1980s, we had the Chernobyl incident. We had at the end of the 80s, the ExxonMobil oil spill, and we had the Challenger incident, which was around 1986. Now, fatigue, lack of sleep played a huge part in these incidents. And today I'm joined by Dr. Kat, and we're going to discuss the question of, we're going to talk about those incidents, and then we're going to talk about what are we getting wrong when it comes to sleep as a society, because clearly we're not sleeping ideally. So, Dr. Kat, can you tell my audience why they should listen to you, why the hell they should listen to you on sleep in 10 seconds?
They should listen to me because, I've got a PhD in the interface of sleep and the body clock, so circadian rhythm, and the body clock plays a huge role in our sleep, but for our health overall. And so, they should listen to me because we all need good sleep, and we all experience periods of poor sleep, and for some of us, it's a chronic situation, and lack of sleep has a negative impact on our quality of life, let alone performance, and so on and so forth. And I basically help people, sleep well again, and crucially feel good and enjoy their life.
Dr. Kat, that was great. That was probably 10 seconds. And I feel that we're in good hands to continue the conversation. You're hired. Right. Okay.
Yeah,
Right. So, so let's talk about those incidents. Now, I recently watched the Chernobyl, the dramatization of that. And I mean, I was born in 78, so I guess I would have been 8 when it happened. So 1986, unless my maths is really bad. I remember the Challenger incident. I remember the ExxonMobil spill, those things being over the news. I wasn't aware that fatigue played a part in those things. So can you enlighten me and my audience how fatigue did contribute to those incidents?
yeah. So fatigue or lack of sleep wasn't the reason these disasters happened, right? Just want to say that. But like you said before, it played or it contributed. So, for example, with the Chernobyl incident, what went on there is that there were working shifts, and the night shift group had been on, I can't remember how many consecutive night shifts, but a rather huge or relatively huge number. And so they were sleep deprived. And when then an emergency situation happened, I don't know if it was an overheating, their brain struggled to make sense of what was going on, what they were seeing on their monitors. And not only were they struggling to make sense of what they saw on the monitors, but then also, okay, and how do we solve this problem, right? They struggled with that. And they were slow, maybe made sort of the wrong decisions. And that is all contributed by, the lack of sleep contributed to this poor performance of these workers there. And then we had the disaster that then, developed following on from that. And what all these incidents clearly show is the impact of lack of sleep on our brain, and particularly on our cognitive performance, so on our thinking skills, on our cognitive skills. Or to flip it around, it shows quite clearly that, if you get a good night's sleep, your performance is just so much better, because you can use your brain, to its full capacity, because it is at its full capacity.
And I guess we've probably all experienced what you're talking about there. Those days when you wake up and you haven't slept properly and your mind feels rubbish. So, you reach for the donuts or the caffeine, whereas the days when you have slept well and the mind just feels ultra fresh. Now, that's really interesting about those things, because I think it touches on, you mentioned shifts. So that's something I want to jump into initially, because they're such extreme examples, and most people wouldn't think that fatigue would play a part. We just think, oh, fatigue, you're a bit rough in the morning, you don't perform very well, you drive to work, wonder how you got there, that sort of thing is an extreme. But you're saying accidents that have cost people lives in the extreme, fatigue contribute to them. So how much of a part does shift, or how much of a detrimental impact can shift working have on us?
Good question. It's not easy to answer, because first of all, human beings, evolution has designed us to be day active, right? So we're active when there's sunlight, And then we slow down, we rest, we sleep when it's dark. And for example, our visual system has adapted to this. So we can see beautifully if there's light, but when it's dark, we struggle to see. Whereas if you look at something like lions and tigers, they've got really good night vision, right? And I've got cats and they are very active at nighttime because, hey, they can still see even if it's dark. So again, we've evolved to be active, use our brain in that sense when it's daylight, and to rest and sleep when it's night. Someone who works shift, meaning they will probably work some day shifts and they will also work some night shifts. They will, first of all, struggle to adapt to this nighttime work because their body is not made for that. You then, depending how many night shifts they do, as in how many consecutive, there can be an adjustment or a partial adjustment. However, that doesn't happen for many people because as soon as you come home in the morning from your night shift, you are exposed to light. Now that light tells your body clock, and this is an area up here roughly in the middle of your brain, and that body clock is connected to your eyes. And there's a special photoreceptor in your eyes, not for vision. What that photoreceptor does, it detects light. And it's very, very sensitive to blue light. And particularly in the morning light, there's a lot of blue light. And when that sensor picks up the light, picks up the blue light, it passes on that information to the clock. And then the clock knows, day has started. And then the clock tells the rest of the body, hey, body, it's daytime now. Do all the things we need for the daytime. Right? Meaning there's food going to come in. So all the enzymes and the digestive system, they're all ready for some food, right? Or the muscles are ready to do something. The brain is ready to do some thinking work. All of that is then done. When it goes dark, just to finish my little story there, when it goes dark, again, that message from the eyes, from the photoreceptors passed to the clock. Hey, clock, lights has gone off. And then the clock goes, okay, body, it's now nighttime. Do everything that's needed for the nighttime.
Okay.
So that's how it works. For our shift worker, when they come home, they get typically that sunlight right into their eyes, because they're walking home, they're driving home, maybe public transport, really depends, but they're getting that light signal. And so their clock will be like, oh, they have started again. Let's push for daytime. But at the same time, because they've been working all night, there's a level of tiredness, of sleepiness that's been accumulated. And you've got these two conflicting systems. You've got the clock here and your sleepiness over there. And it's like, well, who will win? And for some time, typically the sleepiness wins, but only for a few hours, which is why the daytime sleep is so rubbish, because you keep waking up, right? If you get sort of solid sleep at all, because the clock is saying, no, but hang on, I've seen the light, it's daytime now.
Okay.
So whatever sleep you get during the day isn't very restful, which means your sleepiness isn't down here, it's maybe somewhere here, right? And with that, you then go into your night shift. Your brain hasn't had a chance to really restore itself during the sleep phase. And so your cognition, your performance is impaired. And like I said, if the more night shifts that you do, the worse it can get. Only a small percentage of people find it easy to adapt to the night shift. Some people can, for whatever reason, but the vast majority can't. Now, what is a good shift pattern? We don't know. Is it better to do 2 night shifts compared to doing 10 night shifts? It probably varies by person and also what the whole setup around it is.
Okay. Can you ever fully adapt? Let's say, you said it varies from person to person, which makes complete sense. We're all different. Can you actually ever adapt? Let's say someone's been working nights for 20 years. Would their body and their internal clock, which we're going to explore a bit more in a moment, can you ever fully adapt to that?
Questionable, because social life takes place during the day, right? So even if you work Monday to Friday, night shifts on the weekend, a lot of people switch back to a daytime pattern.
For the weekend, yeah.
Exactly. And because that's the natural way of being, your clock can easily snap back into that position. But then by Monday, you have to force it back into the nighttime. There will always be an element of conflict. If you were to really weekend stay on that night work pattern, then maybe
Okay.
I wouldn't exclude it, but one thing we know, there are always exceptions to the rule. So, but my expectation would be it's a handful of people
Yeah. Okay.
do
It's
that.
like Margaret Thatcher, didn't she? Usually apparently needed 4 hours sleep. Although I guess she didn't live till a ripe old age, so maybe that's not a good example. So we
Yeah,
lives four
yes and
years.
no, but there are different reasons for dementia, right? With her, it looks like she was a short sleeper. These people exist. So that's again slightly different from the shift work. She may really have been a short sleeper. We know Churchill wasn't, as much as he tried to give up that vibe, but he had naps during the day, and quite a number of them. Whereas with Thatcher, it may be that she really was a short sleeper.
Yeah.
Um, her dementia, like I said, I don't know how many risk factors for that. Sure, sleep could have been but I'm not too sure in her case.
Okay. So with this, so it's not known whether it 2 nights on shift is better than 10. There's no sort of dividing line between this is good for you and this bad for you. But I'm getting the vibe that in general, working shifts can't be better than working in the daytime because working in the daytime fits with our natural rhythms.
Absolutely. And I'm in awe for anyone who does, shift rotation, whether that's healthcare, police, fire. I worked a lot with miners and also flight crew and cabin crew, all the gas rig workers, excuse me. And I'm in awe of them because I couldn't. I'm a morning person. Not only am I a day person, I really am a morning person. So for me to stay up late, that's already a big struggle. So
Mm.
I just couldn't do it. So like I say, I am in awe of anyone who does shift work.
Yeah, I guess. And so you mentioned about, I think in your book, you mentioned larks and owls. So you would be classified as what you call a lark, somebody who rises with the crack at the crack of dawn.
Yeah, it's shifted, right? And this is really interesting because chronotype is what you refer to here. It's not static. It can shift slightly throughout your lifetime, not massively. If you're really an owl. So chronotype, as in what your inner timing is a bit of a spectrum, what we see in the population. We've got the larks, so these are the really early people, and the owls, the really late people on either end, and the rest of us fall somewhere along this spectrum. And there is some movement, but an owl will never become a lark, and the lark will never become an
Okay.
owl. Right? This is too much of a jump. But I've noticed I've used to be much earlier than I am now. So the difference is maybe half an hour, an hour. It depends a bit also on the season. And having kittens, they are at the moment quite sort of sleep disruption around 5 o'clock. Something to be worked at. So that can also have a bit of an impact that I might sleep half an hour longer, but it's not more sleep. It's just a little bit later because I've had that disruption.
Yeah. Okay.
But yes, I am more on that sort of early part for sure. Yeah.
And I read something. Now I'm not going to quote this because I can't remember where I read it, so I can't take the credibility. I don't think I actually read the study either. I read that it was that actually, even though some people are larks and some are owls, it is actually healthier to be a lark compared to an owl. Even if that's your natural preference, it's still healthier to be a lark. Am I talking rubbish?
Yeah, no, you're not. Sorry, no, you're not talking rubbish. There's a lot of data saying that from a metabolic as well as psychological aspect viewpoint, that being a lark is healthier. But the reasons aren't entirely clear as to why that is. However, having said that, what we know with owls, so with people who want to go to bed late, and let's say they need 8 hours, which is an average, right? Some may need a bit more, some may need a bit less, but just for the sake of it. So let's say you are someone who wants to go to bed at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. and you need 8 hours, right? That means you actually want to sleep until 10 a.m. in the morning to get your 8 hours in. Now, no one can do that. Students or kids will have to go to school and adults will have to be at work by 9 o'clock latest, right? So the owls, they cut their sleep short every night of the working week. And so they're building up a sleep debt, right? And this is a sleep deficit, basically. And that will have an impact on their whole physical health, as well as their mental health and their cognitive performance, right? So
Right.
that could be a reason. There could also be something genetic, that something is there. I think science, in the coming years will have a better understanding. Now, what I find interesting, we believe that this sort of spectrum, larks and owls, has always been there in human society, so even in our ancestors. But right now, this spectrum is about 12 hours. So the earliest lark and the latest owl, in theory, they could, use the same bed and never overlap, right?
Mm.
Because when
Right.
the lark gets up, the owl goes to bed, and vice versa. But that spectrum might have widened, or has become this extended because of our modern society and electric lighting.
Yeah. Okay.
Because there's a study that was done a few years ago, somewhere in the States, with some students, whereby they sort of kept us, a sleep diary while they were living, I don't know, in the student accommodation in the city, and then they all went camping, right, with only natural light, and they still had, a spectrum of larks and owls, but it wasn't as far as in, it was shorter. So the owls became a little bit earlier. And I think
Mm.
the larks may also became a little bit earlier. I can't quite recall, but certainly the owls became a little bit earlier. Still late, but not
Mm.
as late.
So we
As
naturally all would move a bit more
bit
towards each
closer.
other.
Yeah, it wouldn't be
Okay.
super close, right? Like I said, there would always be a spectrum. And that makes sense in the way our ancestors evolved. Our ancestors evolved, well, in the open, whether that was, let's just say in Africa on the savannah,
Mm.
maybe a cave, maybe a tree, right? But it was not well protected, for
Yeah.
sure. They lived in a group, as a tribe, meaning that if they had different sleep times, there would always be someone awake to make sure the group is safe.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Right? So the earlies go to sleep while the lates are still awake, and then they go to sleep, which is when they wake up. And we know that while we sleep, we keep waking up. Very, very short. Maybe, that evolved in order, again, to just check, is everything safe? Okay, I can close my eyes again, roll over, and fall asleep again.
Yeah.
So yeah, this spectrum makes sense, but the way we live, our modern way of living with electric light certainly has an impact and has pushed the owls back even further. However, we are living in an early society, in a Lark society, favors people like me.
Yeah.
By 8, 9 o'clock, I can be at my desk, no problem. But it's not, in that sense, helpful for an
Yeah.
owl.
Okay. Now, actually, you've highlighted something that I hadn't even thought of before. This idea that different depths of sleep, different brain waves while we're sleeping, and coming in and out. I always thought, why isn't sleep just a solid line? And then, as you've pointed out, that evolutionary thing, the being able to wake up slightly because they're just to check for risks, and then go back into a deep sleep, waking up slightly and go back into a deep sleep. It makes complete sense when you think of it in evolutionary terms. Because I know for a lot of people might wake up during the night, the ones that have to go to the toilet and then go back to sleep. But actually, it's probably just a natural way. The deep and then the shallow sleep over and over makes complete sense. So
Yeah.
let's talk about then, we are, as a society, we're getting it wrong. We're definitely not sleeping enough. I know if you look back in history, the Red Army used sleep deprivation as a form of torture. So clearly it's something that can make us either confess to things we don't want to confess, or it's generally not good for us as well. People being kept in boxes, standing up for days on end to get them to confess to crimes under the Stalin's army. So we know sleep deprivation is not a good thing. So what would you say is the number one thing as a society, just on average, you think we're getting wrong when it comes to sleep?
Oh, good question. So my first instance was to say that we think we all have the same sleep need,
Mm.
in the sense that, we all need 8 hours, and we all need to sleep between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. or 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. Sort of this one size fits all. That was my initial response.
Mm.
And I think that is still, a big problem. But I think maybe what we are getting wrong is this idea that we can control our sleep,
Mm.
that we are in control, that we are the masters of our sleep, that we can force sleep to come, or force ourselves to fall asleep, or that if we go on a 10-mile run, we will sleep, or if I take this supplement, then I will sleep. So this idea of being able to control our sleep.
Like, are you saying in terms of that we think we can manipulate these internal rhythms? Is that what you're getting at?
Um, yeah, so the rhythms is one thing, and there we can manipulate it to a certain degree. No, it's more this idea that I can will myself to sleep. I'm in control. I can decide when to sleep and when to be awake.
Ah, I see. Yes, yeah.
That's, and related to that, then there's also this idea, well, if I can't sleep, if I can't do that, if I can't take control of my sleep, something everyone else can do, because that's what the internet tells me and the media tells me. So if I can't do that, I'm broken, I'm failing. Right?
Like with weight loss.
Yeah.
It's that everyone else can lose weight, or if I can do this, I should be able to do it. If I can't, and the fault is mine as opposed to the food environment around me.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe your genetics, right? It could also play a role. But you said the big word should. I should be able to, right? This should, right? I should be sleeping because, well, everyone else can. And it's such an easy thing. Even a baby can sleep. Questionable. But anyway, right? So that should. Exactly.
That rigidness. So I guess, and that is easy to sort of get upset ourselves when we can't fit into the expectations that I guess that we impose on ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's we impose it on ourselves, but also the media. And I don't want to paint like the media is the bad thing, but it's a way of sort of creating opinions. Is kind of feeding into that. It's sort of, here are 5 steps to control your sleep, or 3 steps, and do this to fall asleep and sleep better.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that these things can't help, but they're not ways of controlling sleep. They are supportive behaviors or supportive supplements, but they cannot and they will not guarantee a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
If it was that easy, we probably wouldn't have this conversation, because sleep wouldn't be a topic, because, hey, it's so controllable.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I think what we're getting wrong is that we believe we can control sleep.
Okay, that's very interesting. And I think, we only talk about the media. We do all see these articles, 5 steps to a better night's sleep, this, and this. And they do hint at the idea that it's generalized, a one-size-fits-all approach, which clearly goes against what you said earlier about this individualizing things, everybody being different. Just to rewind then, are you saying that we don't all need 8 hours sleep every night?
Yeah, and good one. Every night is another one. So currently the recommendation for a healthy adult is between 7 and 9 hours of sleep. And there's also a recognition that some people may need a bit more and that some people may need a bit less. But the people who need a bit more, bit less, that's small percentages of people, right, who do that. So the vast majority, we need between 7 and 9. And that can vary a little bit between nights, a bit like eating, right? We all have a normal amount of food that we eat. And then for no apparent reason, sometimes we eat a bit more and someday we eat a bit less, and then we come back to our normal amount. And it can be the same with sleep. Sleep is not a rigid experience, right? It also depends what I've been doing, what I've been experiencing during the day. And it's not just necessarily, I had a stressful day today and therefore I need more sleep tonight. It could be 2 nights later that I need a bit more sleep. We see that, for example, dreams is a good example. There's this hypothesis, and I think there's certainly something to it. What we experience during the day is replayed in our dreams at night, right? So there's a continuity. And there's this dream lag effect, whereby you may have a dream one night and 7 or 10 nights later, you have sort of a similar version of that dream that's sort of related to that. So cause and effect, that doesn't need to be always temporarily so close to each other. It could also be a bit, further apart.
Okay, I think that'd be quite relieving for listeners to hear that you don't need this fixed 8 hours every single night. Next, you'll be telling me that breakfast isn't the most important meal of the day, and that diamonds aren't a woman's best friend, and that Lucozade isn't the ideal thing when you're ill.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so breakfast, right? Again, we don't quite know yet, but it looks like it's a good idea to wait with breakfast for a little while, at least half an hour, maybe even a bit longer. again, science is trying to find it out. And again, if I think back in evolutionary terms, our ancestors, they didn't have a fridge or
Or cornflakes.
cupboard full with food. They would have to wake up and somehow gather their food or hunt their food. So they wouldn't immediately eat when they got up. All right. So I think that certainly it's something to experiment with. Can I just delay my breakfast a little bit?
Yeah.
And it won't work for every single one of us, particularly families, right, where everyone has to get ready to get out of the door. So like I say, it won't work for everyone, and that's okay. But those people who are interested, run an experiment and see what happens if I delay my breakfast a little bit to a little bit later.
Yeah, well, for the record, I'd say I never eat breakfast. I don't eat until 12 o'clock, and I actually find I feel a lot better. I used to think you have to get something down you because, those hunger pangs you get first thing in the morning. Usually, I've actually realized it's because you ate too late that you feel hungry in the morning. And when you haven't eaten, I don't eat after 8 o'clock now. I try not to. And I feel a lot better in the morning. I feel lighter because my body's had the time to digest. Whereas if I eat late and then I cram something down in the morning, I just feel more sluggish. So there's definitely something to be said for that. And I did look into something recently, said that when we time our food, it actually influences these rhythms inside our body. Is that something that you're aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we call that time restricted eating or time restricted feeding if it's in an animal. And there's a lot of research going on there at the moment. But what it all points to is to have a timed phase where you eat and keeping that timed phase as regular as you can. For you, it's from 12 p.m. until 8 p.m., right? Probably families, it might start 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. until everyone has eaten. But keeping that very stable, this period of eating, and then also the period of fast, right? That's the other side of it. What research is showing, though, more and more, is the shorter you can keep that eating window, and therefore the longer you can make that fasting window, that has a positive impact on our metabolic health and also on our body clock. So this body clock up here is a bit like a conductor, and the rest of your body is the orchestra. Right, all the different organs, all the different processes. These are all the musicians, basically, and all these musicians, like in an orchestra, they can play beautifully. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in the orchestra. They can play beautifully, but for them to all play together, they need someone to kind of keep the beat and tell them, now you play and you are quiet, and now you can play and you are quiet, right? Yeah. And then that beautiful piece. That's what the clock does, right? And this clock can keep the beat perfectly well. The slight problem is that the beat this clock has is a little bit longer than 24 hours. However, our external day, the cycle of light and dark, is 24 hours. And our physiology needs to be kept in alignment. It needs to match the length of the external world. And that's where light comes in. That light that I described in the beginning through your eyes to the clock, that resets this clock up here and tells this clock or conductor, okay, 24 hours are starting now. Right? Okay. Now, any other timed and regular behavior sends also a message to the clock. And so that's where the timed eating comes in, or having this regular timed eating window. The clock's like, okay, so now he's eating breakfast. Okay, so we're in the morning. Okay, now he's eating lunch. Okay, so that's roughly about midday. Does this match the light environment outside? Yeah, it does. Okay, we know exactly what's coming next. We're now moving into the afternoon. Okay, he's going to do some exercise. Okay, let's get ready for his exercise, right? If you do that regularly, again, the clock learns that and kind of remembers it and prepares you even before you have started your exercise. So yeah, all of these cues help the clock to know what time of day and what's about to come next. That's the important part. What's about to come next.
And that's interesting. So, and it brings me on to something. There's a sentence that I've written down from your book, and it's something along. I can't even read my own writing here, but it's all you're talking about how you sleep at night is dependent also on what happens in the daytime. So rather than us just focusing on what happens in the evenings or in the 90 minutes pre-bed, you're saying daytime, what we do in the daytime influences our sleep. And that ties into what you've just said about these cues, like when we eat, when we exercise. So what do you think, what are the key things you think people might be doing wrong in the daytime? Because a lot of people won't have thought about the daytime's influence on their sleep quality. What would you say is the number one thing in your experience people are doing, or the people that you've worked with are doing, that's in the daytime that's impacting their sleep negatively?
Mm. So apart from, things like caffeine or stimulants, or what you eat and when you eat, I think one is movement, often a
Okay.
lack of movement. And it doesn't necessarily need to be exercise, but just moving. So we know that long periods of sedentary behavior, long periods of sitting down, is associated with a poorer quality of sleep. So that's one. Then lack of daylight. And by daylight, I mean, being outside,
Yeah.
away from a roof over your head, to really be out in the natural light. And it doesn't matter whether it's sunny or it could be even rainy. It doesn't matter. The light is still stronger outside than it is in here. There's also a change of the light, what different colors that make up the light that we see, which we see as white, but the different colors, they change across the day, not visible to us, but it happens. And this photoreceptor I described early on, that photoreceptor can notice that change in this color composition and feeds back that information to the clock, which the clock again uses as a way of knowing what time of day it is.
Okay.
And then the final one, I think, is, dare I say, that word stress, right? Stress, pressure, this need to perform in a way. And there is, yes, expectations from the external world, but also expectations I have for myself, right? We all want to perform, very well, and so on and so forth. So the pressure, the stresses that arise out of that, together with a lack of me time. So time where I do something that I want to do, something for myself, and that could be alone, that could be with other people, but something that I really want to do. Because for most of the day, and that's true for children as well as adults, we are doing things that we have to do.
Yeah. Go to school,
School
go
for
to
the
work.
kids, work for the adults. And you may enjoy your work, that absolutely, but it's still, it serves a certain purpose, right? Means to an end, kind of get the financial support or the money come in, and to then really do what you want to do. But that time is often very short or pushed back. And what can then sort of come is not only stress, and the mind keeps stuck in work thoughts, but there's also this feeling, I haven't done anything for myself, right? And we get a bit of conflict, a bit of struggle, unhappiness, tension.
Yeah.
Right? Tension in the body is registered by the brain. If the body is tense, the brain's like, why is the body tense? That means there must be some danger. We can't fall asleep, because if there's a lion hiding somewhere, that's going to come and eat us up. So we need to stay awake. So yeah, I think stress, and related to that, a lack of me time.
Okay. And because I like that you use the word movement as well. I think, the word exercise puts a lot of people off. And I think you think I have to go to a spin class in a gym, or doing whatever, Reebok step. But actually movement could just be going walking, it could be cycling, could be doing anything. I guess doing some gentle stretches at home. Movement is movement at the end of the day, isn't it?
I don't know, after every hour, stand up, and get a glass of water, or just stand up and stretch and sit back down again, or just move the upper body. I mean, it's little things like that. It just changes your posture. Because we sit like this, right, hunched over, and that's all stress. That's a stress signal for the body, and of course then we get tension here. But just moving, changing, right, that changes the whole body, that changes the input to the brain. And it can also give you your thinking brain just a moment to pause, because it's not required to make sense of the next email. It can just go, okay, we're just moving. I can hear pause. I can take a breather. So it's little things like that can also make a difference.
I guess also what we're talking about here is all these other cues we're giving the clock. There's this clock in our brain. We're giving them the cues by moving, by eating at a certain time, by doing certain things in the daytime, that this is awake time, and therefore obviously then when it flips round, it's sleep time when those things aren't happening. So would you say then, if someone, I don't know, to exercise late at night, if you work shifts and let's say you finish work at 10 p.m. and then go to certain gyms that are open 24 hours, is that a good thing to go to the gym and exercise in the middle of the night if you work shift patterns?
Yeah, it depends, right? What you want to do, whether you want to stay up or want to go to sleep. It is really, there is no one size fits all approach. So my initial response would be, no, don't go and exercise at that time, because it will delay your sleep time even more. But if that's what you want, if you are someone who finds it relatively easy to sleep during the day, like I said, these people do exist, then you may want to go to the gym and do an exercise routine. But generally we say, leave about 3 hours or so between end of exercise and going to bed.
Okay.
Certainly if it's a more intense exercise, if it's gentle stretching or some yoga, then it might be fine. Again, see how it affects you. But yeah, so I'd be careful with the high intensity evening exercise close to bedtime.
How about this then, Dr. Kat? You got a worker named Brian. He works a heavy job. He drives through the night. He's got to do the manual labor with it. He finishes work at 11 o'clock at night. So he always works night shifts. So he's always working late shifts. And he's got the option to go to the gym an hour before he has to go to bed, okay, and do his weightlifting, whatever he wants to do, or not do it. Now, we know the impacts on the heart, the metabolic health issues, the complications from working shifts, but also he could exercise. So is it better that he tries to counter those metabolic effects of shifts by exercising, or is it better for him not to exercise so close to his bedtime? There's one for you. That should scramble your mind.
So it depends, when does he need to get up, right? So I would say, can't he go to the gym in the morning or before he starts his shift, right? Which may be sometime around 1 p.m. that he starts his shift, or 3. So could he go then? That would, for me, be the best option then at night.
Well answered.
Yeah.
Brian's pleased with your response. He said he'll go in the morning now. So we've got these things then. We've got the fact that we're trying to control our sleep, and I noticed in your book you talked about, there was a sentence where you talked about us getting so caught up with trying to enforce every single sleep pillar and get it right, and getting annoyed with ourselves when we don't get every single thing, when we don't tick every box. And we're in society now where we're counting our steps, we're counting our REM sleep, we're counting our deep sleep, we're measuring everything. Is this good, the fact that we're measuring the hell out of everything, and then waking up and think, well, I only had 1 hour of REM sleep or deep sleep last night, I'm really annoyed with myself? Is that a good thing?
You already said it, right? Only had, and we use the annoyance. So then for me, that's not helpful, because annoyance, can incorporate frustration and anger, and there's this not good enough, and I only had 1 hour. These are all emotions which will bring about a physiological reaction, and that physiological reaction is that of a threat response.
Yeah.
Vary in intensity, but it's that of a threat response, which then tells the brain, hang on, something is going on, something isn't right. We can't relax. We need to remain vigilant. We need to remain alert, right? Which then makes it harder to fall asleep or stay asleep or get a restful night. So I think we've become too obsessed with numbers generally in our society, this whole measuring.
Calorie counting.
Absolutely, because we use it to then make a judgment. We don't use it just as an information. We use it to then impart a judgment, and if it's not good enough, right, and again, there's a judgment in this, not good enough, as in, but anyway, so if it's not good enough, okay, I'm at fault, I have to do better, right? And so the whip comes out, I have to do better, whipping myself into shape.
Self-flagellation.
Right, and that's not relaxing. That's not calming. That's,
that'll affect your sleep.
Exactly, it affects your sleep.
So, would you suggest that we in general, they're not? Maybe we should forget about the sleep apps, because how accurate are they even?
Some are a bit better than others, but they're certainly not 100% accurate. So. Rather than saying, don't use them at all, if you are interested, then use them as sort of a source of information, and a source of information, but not the holy grail, right?
Right.
It's
Okay.
not like they tell you the absolute truth.
Right.
Measuring sleep is actually rather complicated. I can measure it objectively, using these devices, or what you would do in a sleep lab is, hooking you up with electrodes and measuring your brain waves. And depending on what pattern you see, you can say this person is awake or asleep. And then also within the sleep, you can say light sleep, deep sleep, or REM sleep, commonly called dream sleep. So that's one way of assessing sleep. But then there's also the subjective experience, asking the person. And that can vary massively from your objective recording with the electrodes. Right?
Okay.
And
So
which one is wrong?
if I wake up and my app, I don't have an app, by the way. I'd rather not have something attached to my body that's counting things while I'm asleep. But let's say I wake up then, my app, I feel I've had an amazing night's sleep. I feel so refreshed. I can't wait to go out and run and do whatever I've got to do. But my app says you've slept awful. Where do I go? Do I believe myself or do I believe the app?
Yeah, right. A good question. So for me, in my work with my clients, I always say check in with yourself first, how you feel, and then look at the watch. And I'm careful with the watch. Like I said, they're not 100% accurate. I would never take and just look at one night. I would always look at a number of nights to see, is there a pattern?
Yeah.
So rather than believing, oh, you've only had 10% deep sleep, I would look, okay, does this repeat over a number of nights? Okay, and what we then know, okay, so yes, you do have less deep sleep. Whether that's exactly 10% or a bit more, a bit less, we don't know. It doesn't matter so much. What we can see, there's a pattern, right? Okay, then next is to look in the daytime. What's going on in the daytime? Your exercise, your food, and so on and so forth, but particularly also your stress. How do you actually feel? Do you feel like your life has meaning and purpose or not? As in, what's going on there? Looking at that as well, and see, is there somehow a correlation? So those apps, again, I think they can be a source of information, but not the absolute truth. And for me, to come back to your original question, actually what the person is feeling and sensing is much more important than what any device tells me.
Yeah, and despite what whoever sells the devices might tell you about how intuitive they are, I think so. We've got this, because I think it was the management guru Peter Drucker said, "What gets measured gets managed." And I think we're so, like you've said, fascinated with metrics on things about how the levels of sleep, how many hours of certain levels, and whatever, all that stuff, and calorie counting now, and counting our steps. And calorie count, we know, is one of the most destructive things you can do in terms of weight loss, because first of all, calories aren't an absolute anyway. It's not a calorie. 1,000 calories of cucumber is different to 1,000 calories of pork pies. They have a very different effect on your metabolism. So I think, counting steps as well, all these things we've been fascinated with, but I think it's been nice if we could come back around to what you're saying, Dr. Kat, and actually be a bit more intuitive with these things and think of the subjective experience and use that as a guiding force rather than, I feel great, but my app said I shouldn't feel great, so therefore I'm not going to feel great. Yeah,
absolutely. And unfortunately, some people do. And there's even a name that's been proposed for what can happen is if I completely believe what this device is telling me, and that device is telling me in this instance I haven't got good sleep, then I become anxious about sleep, and then I actually do develop a sleep problem, right? And we've sort of some research called this orthosomnia. So first of all, there isn't a real sleep problem, but this obsession with sleep, which can then lead to more anxiety, more stress, physiological arousal, and then poor sleep. Yeah, that's termed orthosomnia.
Like almost like the nocebo effect, which is the flip of the placebo. Placebo, you expect something to help, it will. Nocebo, you expect something to have a detrimental effect, it will. So worrying about our sleep isn't a good thing then. And that brings me on to what I was going to talk about next. In your book, you talk about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. You talk about ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. So how, with your clients, do you find those sort of things when you're with your sleep coaching clients, they have a positive impact on people in general, or do you target those things at specific sleep issues?
Yeah. So there's CBT, there's ACT, acceptance commitment therapy. You know, there's slightly different approaches. Personally, I think none is better than the other. It's just what you, the client, what you resonate with, as it is with many things. You know, we don't all like gin. You know, some people like vodka.
Yeah.
Why, but these people exist. So yeah, but for me, I work with ACT, and within that, I first of all would look, okay, what's going on with the sleep, you know, and for example, do you allow yourself enough time in sleep? Do you have regular sleep times or not? And then looking at, okay, what's going on in your day, sort of just generally, you know, is it fast paced or is it slow? What's going on there? And then also looking at the nighttime, well, what actually is what is the problem, and what happens when you can't sleep? And for, you know, vast majority of people, there's a lot of thinking going on, and there's a lot of thinking about the next day or the future, and typically
ahead.
Exactly. Typically a lot of predictions. If I don't fall asleep within the next 5 minutes, I'm going to feel rubbish the next day, which means I won't perform well, and not perform well in whatever area of life. Now, once you've been presented with that prediction, although it's rather presented as a prediction, it's presented as the absolute truth.
Yeah.
Right, at 3 a.m., it's the absolute truth that you tomorrow at 9 o'clock will perform suboptimally. That's not going to fill you with joy. It will fill you with tension. It will fill you with anxiety, maybe even frustration. All completely normal, but not helpful for your body to come back into a calm and relaxing state.
Yeah.
So if I believe this prediction to be the absolute truth, then of course I'm going to be rigid. But if I can see it as a prediction, something my mind at 3 a.m. is predicting to happen the next day, then I can say, yeah, this could happen, and it may not happen.
Yeah.
Right. If it does happen, how could I mitigate it? How could I hold myself? How can I treat myself if I am tired and not as, you know, agile in my thinking? Is there anything I can do? Right. And that approach will certainly reduce the tension in the body, and it might get you back to sleep. It may get you into a place of rest. Certainly, that's better than being in a position of struggle and, you know, tension and stress at 3 a.m., which will only zap energy and keep you awake.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because, a lot of my listeners might not have come across ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, or cognitive behavioral therapy, also known as CBT. The great thing about things like that, you can do them yourself, can't you? And also, it links into what you were saying about your daytime affects your nighttime affects your daytime. So those thoughts and things that are arising, or that we're believing that are going to happen, those future predictions, we can challenge them throughout the daytime as they come to us, I guess. And, you know, if we're in the evening thinking, I'm going to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, well, actually, that's just a prediction, like you've said. So we can challenge that. Or I had an awful night's sleep, so I'm going to be awful in that meeting this morning. We can challenge all those things. And I think it's almost like clearing your mental inbox, isn't it? So that those things that might affect us or make us feel a certain way, we're just being objective about them. Because it's not rose-tinted specs, is it? It's just objectivity.
That's exactly what it is. Just being objective. Just notice, there's that thought. Yep, there's that judgment or prediction. Okay, now what can I do now? Right? Yeah. What can I do now to help myself? You know, that's the key. So it's like you say, objectively become aware of that mental sort of piece of information that's somewhere showing up in my mind, and then say, okay, right, what's most helpful right now?
Because just because we think it doesn't mean it's true, does it? What's that quote from the French philosopher Montaigne? It was, "My life was full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened."
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
Yeah, that summed up me for many a year. And I'm someone who I've had cognitive behavioral therapy when I was straight after university, actually. And it's something I've learned over the recent years, probably in the last 10 years I've been using it. And I find head hits the pillow, ABC model from cognitive behavioral therapy, process anything that's happened or anything that I'm worried about, anything. It's amazing the difference when you've cleared your mental inbox, the difference in your quality of sleep between that and going to bed with it's like having a full stomach, isn't it? It doesn't help sleep, and a full head doesn't help sleep either. So just a way of clearing that mental inbox. Check out a bit of a cognitive behavioral therapy that Dr. Kat, our expert here, can guide you through. Let's walk into the workplace then, Dr. Kat. Workplaces are obviously, they don't want their staff to feel unwell. They don't want them to underperform. They don't want them to leave their jobs. They want them to be firing on all cylinders, happy, engaged, loving life at work. But certain things in the workplace, daytime and nighttime, we can talk about now, aren't helping their staff with their sleep. What would you pick out as the main things in your experience of working with leaders in businesses and organizations? What are the businesses doing that is hindering staff sleep?
Pressure.
Okay.
Pressure to perform. So one is pressure to deliver, and that's sort of deadlines, workload and deadlines. But I think then there is sort of a pressure to perform, and it's a constant performance, right? That is the workplace, but that's, I think, also what we all have, or many of us have internalized, that I have to perform 100% always.
Yeah.
And that's not helpful.
At 10 p.m. at night.
Yeah, and 5 days a week, and the whole month, and so on and so forth. I think I sometimes get the impression there's this assumption, almost like, humans are like machines. You press a button, they're on, and you press another button, it's off. And we're not like machines. We're a biological system. Things fluctuate. Right. And I mean, women, we've got a menstrual cycle, so that's an easy example here. Things fluctuate. Our performance during the day fluctuates. It's like our hunger levels fluctuate during the day or across the 24-hour clock, and so on and so forth. So but that's sort of ignored, pushed to the side. It's more this sort of machine mentality, and I know I'm using extreme words here, but I think it sort of goes a little bit in that direction.
Yeah. And it's interesting, actually, because again, it ties back to what you've said all along as a theme through this conversation: individualizing. Everybody's different. And I think if ever businesses expect everybody to be fully switched on 9 a.m. and fully function at that point, they're probably going to be slightly upset, because if they are seeing people that everybody's the same, everybody performs the same, then when that person isn't switched on and firing on all cylinders at 2 minutes past 9, manager comes down on them. You're not very good at the, Kat, you're rubbish. It's 9:15 and you haven't got through these 15 emails and whatever. But actually, if they looked at people as individuals, they're probably going to get a better performance out of them. What would you say to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And since we are, many companies are, working globally with different offices in different countries and different time zones. For me, it always would make sense, early people like myself, yes, come in early, right, and deal with anyone in Asia and Australia. And the later people come in a few hours later, and they can then stay later and cover with everyone in the Americas, would work beautifully, rather than, everyone has to come in early and stay late. So yeah, flexi times, depending on your chronotype, on your personal sort of feel best, for me would make absolute sense.
So working with people in line with their rhythms is going to get better outcomes. Yeah. Sorry, you're going to say about a study?
So they have been, I think, a couple of studies done a few years ago where, they looked at, it was shift work, 3 rotating shifts, an early shift, a late shift, and a night shift. And for a period of time, people were assigned based on their chronotype, based on when they felt best. And they saw an uptick. We similarly see an uptick when schools sort of stagger the start times depending on age. So when teenagers, when they are allowed to come in a little bit later, I don't know, 10, 11 o'clock instead of 8 o'clock, you see an uptick in their performance, right? So we do see differences. But, these are all isolated studies. We continue to put everyone through the same mold. You have to be there early.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah, we need to see everybody as different. When it comes, whatever it is in terms of well-being, we're all completely individual, and the impacts of sleep deprivation on, I guess, is all individual as well. Now, let's get a bit scary for a moment. Let's talk about someone who's listening to this thinking, well, I've got a team of 20 guys who are working in my factory for me, and I don't personally care what Dr. Kat says. I need them to be working at these times because I know if they work that time and those shifts, I get my production line. Everything's on time. I don't care about the well-being of these guys. What are these impacts? Let's talk metabolic health. What are the top 2, 3 in negative impacts we could have on our metabolic health through improper sleep?
Will be different for different people, what other sort of risk factors you carry, right? But we know diabetes is related to poor sleep, weight gain, obesity, cardiovascular diseases, even things like stroke. Then there is some research looking at cancer,
Yeah,
I think colon cancer in particular. So there's a lot. Our immune system is less robust with insufficient sleep or sleeping at the wrong time. And of course, diabetes, obesity, they can sort of enhance each other or boost each other, and then
absolutely.
have an impact on our cardiovascular health. So there's a lot that poor sleep contributes to or increases your risk for the development of such diseases. And that will have, that's how I would come back with it will have an impact on your productivity, because that worker won't be as productive. On the flip side, the healthcare cost for this person will go up. So first of all, absenteeism, not being present. That means other people have to pick up the work for that person, which can put them under more strain and make them more susceptible to illnesses. So that person is absent, but then also the healthcare cost for that person to recover, they also need to be paid for. And it might not impact that factory, but it impacts the economy as a whole. And there was a report out in 2016, I think, from RAND Europe, where they looked at, I think, 5 different countries and, the impact of poor sleep, insufficient sleep on the economy. And the estimation for the UK economy was 40 billion a year, right? So poor sleep costing the UK economy up to 40 billion a year.
Wow.
This is a vast amount of money. No one talks about this. But that's huge.
Yeah, that's quite a staggering figure.
And that wouldn't have come down with the pandemic, for sure not. Because we saw anxiety levels rise during the pandemic, and levels of sleepiness went up. They would have come down somewhat now, but the problem is with sleep or poor sleep. It's quite normal to sleep poorly when you are going through a period of stress, and whatever stress means to you could be different to me.
Yes.
But that's completely normal. When that stress goes, usually good sleep returns, but not for everyone, right? Or the repeated exposure to stress can then actually lead to a long-term sleep problem. And that's the big worry in response to the pandemic, that we have actually an increase in the chronic cases.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, one of the things in terms of metabolism, when I was reading your book, Sleep Sense, it was when you talk about insulin resistance. Now, we know that insulin resistance, for those of you who haven't come across this term, seems to be that point at which everything can start to go wrong. If we're eating the wrong types of carbohydrates, we're eating loads of sugar and stuff like that, and at the point where we're more at risk for diabetes, heart disease, for strokes, all of those things at that point is obesity and insulin resistance. The body's inability to use insulin to bring our blood sugar levels back down. When that happens on a chronic basis, it's called diabetes. The body just can't respond. It can still produce some insulin, but the body can't respond to that insulin. And so that should hopefully, and I'm not trying to scare people, but strike a bit of fear into people who think, I don't care about my sleep, it's not important. From what Dr. Kat's saying in her book, when insulin resistance, if that risk is increased, you do want to care about this. This is where that sort of part of the point in the road where you need to start thinking about this. And a lot of people won't know their insulin resistance. That's the scary thing. And things can just get worse and worse and worse. So I'm really glad you pointed that out in your book, Dr. Kat. Just as before we bring things to a close, I want to ask you a question. What aren't we talking about when it comes to sleep that we should be talking about?
Oh, good one. What aren't we talking about when it comes to sleep? Yeah, I think that's probably the individuality, right? The difference in sleep needs, and here particularly the difference in sleep timing. I think that's the big thing that's not really being talked about. Not really. No. You're sort of aware because this chronotype, fascinating. Larks, owls, yeah, we're all fascinating. But we actually don't really discuss the impact of that, of the chronotype and the way we work and live, and what that does to our physical and mental health. And that's adults and that's teenagers, right? And I think particularly teenagers here, because they are at the beginning of their lives, and they are, many of them are forced, to get up at 7 o'clock thereabouts, when that's still the middle of the night for them, biologically speaking.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're not talking enough about individual sleep times, and related to that, the impact, the constant light, right? Because here I've got control over my electric lighting, the impact of that constant light has, and here I'm thinking of that light in the evening, where we artificially extend our day, which is why owls become even later, right? We're not talking enough about that, or rather the way it's been talked about. Oh yeah, blue light at night is bad. That don't stare at your phone, don't stare at your computer screen. That's not really a discussion. It's a sort of very much do this and don't do that, and with that the road's closed. But it's not that easy. It's not that easy. We know we all get a dopamine hit from scrolling through Facebook, Instagram, whatever the social media platform of your choice is, and so on and so forth. Or you need to do it for work. Again, thinking of a deadline, right, where you have to work late into the evening in front of a screen. So it's not that easy. So I think that needs to be that there needs to be a proper discussion around that. Including, well, what's the alternative then, right? If I don't look at my screen, what do I do then? Because so much is steered towards watching something on a screen.
Okay. So individualizing and light exposure, they're two things. Everybody start talking about these things, because we're not talking about them enough. And clearly, from what you've said today, Dr. Kat, these things have a massive impact. Just before we finish up, I want to recap on some of the things you've said. I've been scribbling wildly. I don't know if I'll be able to read my handwriting, but hopefully I will. And I'll also include some of this in the show notes afterwards as well. But we've talked about this sleep need as well. So the fact that, yes, shift patterns can have a negative impact, but I guess if organizations learn to do what they can to work with the person's individual sleep needs around their shift patterns, that can have a positive impact. Sleep debt as well, we talked about. And this idea that actually, as Dr. Kat said, you don't need 8 hours. So first of all, you don't need 8 hours. Breakfast isn't the most important meal of the day. Diamonds aren't a girl's best friend. And guess what? You don't have to count you don't have to measure your sleep either, which is good, because we talked about apps and how Dr. Kat said that subjective reports, your view of how well you've slept, is far more important than something that's strapped to your wrist that is counting, because they're not always 100% accurate. So your subjective experience of your sleep is far better indicator of your sleep quality than an app. And really interestingly, Dr. Kat's talked about how what you do in the daytime affects your sleep. We focus too much on our evening routine. What about what you do in the daytime? Like Dr. Kat said about your movement, when you're eating, what's going on in your mind, which ties into these ideas around cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, which are great psychological tools that you can use yourself, or with the support of a sleep coach like Dr. Kat, to help you to challenge those things. Remember that quote from Montaigne: my life was full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened. A lot of the mental noise is just that noise. So just look at it more objectively. And Dr. Katz talked about finally about the two things she thinks we're not speaking about that we should be, and that is the individualizing the sleep experience, not expecting everybody to be the same, and also around our light exposure. So Dr. Kat, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. You are a sleep legend. Dr. Kat, where can my listeners find out more about you and your brilliant book, Sleep Sense, that I've read 3 times now, and I think I learned something. It's like watching The Matrix. I learn something a bit more each time I watch it. So what are you doing with organizations and people at the moment, and where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so I do 2 things. I work with individuals, one-to-one setting, helping them sleep well, through the sleep coaching, exactly, using active acceptance commitment therapy. And then I work with organizations in really different ways. This could be through webinars, little sort of workshops or hackathons, it really depends, as well as, doing lectures, because we all need sleep. How much and when is different, but we all need sleep. And if we don't get enough sleep, then we all feel it, right? We feel its effect. So yeah, in that sense, I can work and will work with anyone really. Now, how to find me? Best is probably going on my website, drkatsleep.com. And you can send me an email, book an initial call with me, or follow me on Instagram, again, Dr. Cat Sleep, and get some updates, little pieces of information, little nuggets that way.
Brilliant. And what about this fella here? Where can people find a copy
Yes.
of Sleep Sense?
In any bookstore, probably now online, probably easier, because it's been out a few years. There's actually a second edition, which is a little bit sort of shorter format, but no, they keep changing it. So that's out as well since last year, the second edition of it.
I noticed as well, actually, when I was on your website, the new cover's different. I feel like I've been left out now because you've got it's a totally different color. So I've got the blue one now. Do I need to get the new one as well?
So I'll be really honest. I prefer the blue cover. I prefer the first one. My favorite color is blue, and it took a long time for us to get that blue. So I'm really, really happy, or more happy with the first version. And
Okay,
the
so
second one has a few updates around sleep in women. So that's the big difference between the two.
okay, you prefer blue. So I don't need to feel blue in myself. The fact that I haven't got the second edition, then.
Not at all. Not
Right.
at
Okay.
all.
So, well, that's great. So people can find you. They can find you on your socials. They can buy your book online and book calls to if if they want to speak to you in their organisations or in their personal capacity. You didn't mention the fact you're on QVC. You were. I watched an interview of you on QVC. So
Yeah.
clearly now you're a celebrity, aren't you now as well?
Yeah, celebrity, exactly. Yeah. So I do that. I do speaking engagements at conferences, like I said, lectures as well. Anywhere where there is an interest in sleep and the body clock. I think the body clock, circadian rhythm, circadian health, that will be sort of the next step. That sort of alignment of all our inner processes with one
Yeah.
another, and then with the outside world. So that goes beyond sleep. That really includes your metabolic health, physical, mental health, all of that.
And I deliberately didn't delve too much into that today because I thought that would be my sneaky way of getting you back on another time as well. So
I like that.
that
Yes, let's do
cheeky
that.
strategy there. So, well, Dr. Kat, it's been really interesting. You've given everybody an excuse to watch QVC as well. I'm sure, although I'm sure many were already fans anyway. A brilliant book that you brought out back in 2018. I highly recommend everyone just give it a read on. So I've read it 3 times. I learned something new every time. It's really helped me to get my sleep. That and having chickens that I have to go and see at 6:30 in the morning. So Dr. Kat's book plus the chickens have enabled me to get my sleep from about I would say a 6 out of 10 to easily a 10 out of 10. My sleep quality, I think, is amazing now. It aids my emotional state, my cognitive abilities. Everything is really on fire, and I've got Dr. Kat in large part to thank for that. So, Dr. Kat, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak to me and educate me and my audience. Everyone, I hope you found this as interesting as I have. Hopefully, my sneaky tactic will get Dr. Kat back on here to speak more about the circadian rhythms and how they impact on our sleep. Other than that, everyone have a great day. Dr. Kat, I want to thank you for your time. You've been absolutely brilliant.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
See you later, everyone. Bye-bye. Oh, and by the way,
Bye.
sleep well and prosper.